She's awake. Those two words hit Adaeze like a fist to the chest. She was standing in the kitchen stirring pepper soup. She had no appetite for when her cousin's voice came through the phone, and for one full second she couldn't breathe. Then she started thinking. She crossed to the doorway and looked into the sitting room where Simi was folding laundry, 12 years old, same slight build as Dara, same dark skin, same general shape of face. The resemblance had always been there. Ngozi had never thought much of it before. She was thinking of it now. The woman, she doesn't remember? Ngozi asked slowly. They said the memory loss is significant. Familiar faces might help. They want to bring the girl to America. Ngozi set down the phone. She sat very still at the kitchen table. She thought about the mansion in Ikoyi where Dara had spent 3 months. The marble floors, the imported furniture, the life on the other side of that phone call. She thought about her own daughter growing up in this cramped flat with its peeling walls and shared bathroom. She thought, the woman can't remember faces. The husband barely knows the child. What exactly would stop me? And in the ugly quiet of that thought, a plan began to form. They think this is a story about a woman waking up. It isn't. It's a story about a girl who is already forgotten, and what she did to stay alive until someone remembered her. Stay with me until the very last note of this story. Subscribe now, and let's begin. Her name was Dara. Not a nickname, not a shortened for or something longer. Just Dara, the name her mother had chosen because it meant tenderness, and her mother had been exactly that kind of woman. Dara had grown up in a single room in Mushin, Lagos, where the ceiling developed new leaks every rainy season, and the walls were thin enough that she could hear everything the neighbors said and everything they chose not to say. Her father was a man she had never met, a man who had denied knowing her mother the moment the pregnancy became inconvenient, and had walked away without looking back. Her mother never recovered from that particular wound. Not emotionally, not financially, not in the way a body recovers when it has been asked to carry too much for too long. She was the kind of woman who skipped meals without mentioning it. The kind who smiled through headaches so her daughter wouldn't be frightened. The kind who told herself just a few more years, just until Dara was a little older, just until things steadied. Things didn't steady. They worsened steadily, with the particular cruelty of poverty that has learned patience. And one morning when Dara was reciting multiplication tables at the back of a government school classroom, her teacher called her out of the room with an expression Dara had never seen on a grown person's face before. A neighbor had sent a message. Her mother had collapsed. Dara was brought to the hospital by that same neighbor. She sat in a plastic chair outside the ward for 6 hours with her school bag still on her back and her uniform still on her body and did not move, because moving felt like admitting something she was not ready to admit. A nurse came eventually. She said the words. Dara already knew them. She cried until there was nothing left to cry with. And then Ngozi appeared, her mother's older sister, the only surviving family. Dara looked at her through swollen eyes and felt something loosen in her chest. Relief, she thought. Someone has come. I'm not alone. She was wrong. Ngozi's house was an oshadi. 3 bedrooms, a compound shared with 2 other families, a generator that ran 3 hours in the evening when Ngozi decided the fuel cost was justified. It was not a warm house. It was a house that functioned. Dara would come to understand the difference. From the first morning, before the sun had properly risen, Ngozi knocked on the door of the storage room where Dara slept. Not a bedroom, a storage room with a thin foam mat on the floor, and told her what the day required. Clothes needed washing by hand. Floors needed sweeping. Water needed fetching from the tap at the compound entrance before the morning rush. Then school. Then hawking after school. Sachets of water, small chops, groundnuts, running between moving cars on the hot road while other children in other houses were sitting down to homework and afternoon television. Ngozi's daughter, Simi, was 12, the same age as Dara. Simi slept in a proper bed. Simi attended a private school with a uniform that didn't have holes in the collar. Simi ate first. Simi complained about the food and was heard. Dara watched all of this without complaint, because nobody had told her she had the right to complain, and she had not yet understood that rights don't require permission. What kept her going was a small thing. Her mother's voice, humming, low and soft, like a lullaby with no words. She would hear it sometimes in the space between being awake and being asleep. It made her feel, for a few seconds, like the world contained someone who was specifically glad she was in it. It was a Thursday afternoon in August when everything changed. Dara was running an errand for Ngozi, a message to be delivered 3 streets over. No shoes because her only pair had a hole that had grown into something structural, and Ngozi had said there was no money for new ones. No food since morning because she had been running since 5 a.m. and nobody had offered, and she had not asked. The Lego son was making no concessions. She cut across a junction, moving fast, not quite looking, the way children move when they're trying to outrun the awareness of their own hunger, and collided directly into the side of a large black SUV. The impact sat her down hard on the hot tarmac. She scrambled up before the shock had even fully registered. Sorry, she started, her voice already climbing in a panic before she had even raised her eyes. The window came down. Inside was a woman unlike anyone Dara had encountered up close. Not on the street. Not in any compound she had ever entered. The kind of elegant that doesn't announce itself, but is simply present, the way light is simply present in a room with good windows. She was looking at Dara with an expression that was not annoyance, not irritation, not the impatience that Lagos traffic tends to install in people. It was concern, pure and specific and directed entirely at Dara. Come here, she said. Let me look at you. And Dara's legs, which had been running since before sunrise on an empty stomach in 37 degrees of August heat, quietly gave up. She fainted on the road. When she opened her eyes, she was in a hospital room she had not chosen. White sheets, cold conditioned air, a drip in her left arm. Sitting beside her, leaning forward, watching with the focused attention of someone who had decided that whatever happened next was going to happen with her present, was the woman from the car. You are safe, she said. You are safe. Those 3 words did something to Dara that she could not have predicted and could not have stopped. She started crying before the thought to cry had fully formed. Not from pain, not from relief exactly, but from the specific shock of being cared for by a stranger who had no reason to stay and had stayed. Her name was Mrs. Adaeze Ibe. She was 41 years old, married to a man named Emeka who worked in London, childless not by choice, but by circumstance, and she had a way of sitting beside a person in a hospital room that made the room feel like somewhere you were meant to be. The doctors told her that Dara was severely dehydrated and malnourished. They said it with the practiced neutrality of people who report difficult facts regularly. But something in the specific way they looked at the child in the bed communicated what the neutral language was trying not to. When Ani Ngozi arrived, not from love, Dara understood later, but from the fear of losing something she had come to consider an asset, Mrs. Adaeze looked at her for a long moment and said almost nothing. But Ngozi, who had spent 12 years calculating other people's reactions to her, flinched. That night, Mrs. Adaeze called her husband in London on video. She told him she had found a child, that something had shifted inside her in a way she didn't have clean language for. Emeka was a man with a good face, not handsome in a performed way, but good, the kind of face that tells you how a person will behave in the difficult moments before you've seen any of the difficult moments. He listened to everything his wife said. He could see in her face something he had not seen there in a long time. Whatever you feel is right, my love, he said. Do it. 3 days later, Dara moved into the house in Ikoyi. There are no words, not in any language she knew. For the first morning, she woke up in a room that belonged to her. A real room, with curtains that matched the bedspread, and a small lamp on the nightstand that glowed a warm amber color at night, like something gentle keeping watch. She had never had a birthday cake, not once in 12 years. Mrs. Adaeze found this out in the second week and organized one. Quiet, just the 2 of them, pink frosting and 12 candles, and the most earnest, tuneless singing Dara had ever heard. She blew out the candles and made a wish. She never told anyone what it was. But if you had been watching her face in that moment, you would not have needed to be told. They cooked together on Saturday mornings. Mrs. Adaeze was catastrophically bad at jollof rice and had accepted this fact about herself with remarkable grace. She always added too much water, always, without fail, and this became a private joke between them. Dara standing on a small stool to reach the counter and correcting her with the quiet authority of a child who had learned to cook out of survival, and Mrs. Adaeze pretending to be offended and then laughing until she had to hold the counter for balance. They danced in the hallway in their pajamas, actual proper dancing. Arms in the air, made-up steps, Mrs. Adaeze inventing increasingly absurd moves while Dara collapsed on the floor laughing. For a child who had spent years being invisible, being seen, truly, specifically, deliberately seen, was the largest thing that had ever happened to her. Mrs. Adaeze taught her piano. They sat together at the instrument in the sitting room every evening for an hour, and Dara was good at it. Naturally, instinctively good in the way that happens when something a person was built for finally finds them. One evening, without planning it, they created something together. A simple, quiet melody. 8 notes in a specific sequence. Nothing complicated. Something that belonged entirely to them. "This is our song," Mrs. Adaeze said, pressing Dara's small hand gently over the keys. "Only you and I know this one." And one evening, being carried to bed after falling asleep on the sofa, Dara said something that was not quite awake and not quite a decision. "Good night, Mum." And Mrs. Adaeze stopped walking, stood completely still in the hallway for a moment, and then pressed the child against her chest and cried quietly. She started the adoption paperwork the next morning. Everything was exactly as it should have been, which is precisely when it stopped being that way. If this story is doing something to you already, hit subscribe right now and drop a like. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, because this story is about to get harder before it gets to where it's going. It was a Tuesday evening in November, raining in the specific relentless way Lagos rains. Not gently, not politely, when Mrs. Adaeze's car hit a patch of standing water on the road back from Victoria Island and slid. The impact was significant. By the time the ambulance reached her, she was unconscious. By the time she arrived at the hospital, the doctors were using words like critical and uncertain, and we cannot tell you right now. She slipped into a coma. Emeka flew back within hours. A man moving on fear and love and the specific desperation of someone who has just understood what he stands to lose. The doctors said her best chance was a specialist facility in America. Before he left with her, he came to Ngozi's house. He stood at the door with red eyes and a controlled voice and said the words he meant entirely. "Once my wife recovers, we will come back for Dara. She is our daughter. That does not change." Dara stood in the doorway and watched the car leave. She was holding Mrs. Adaeze's silk scarf, the one she had grabbed without thinking, the one that still carried the faintest trace of her perfume. She screamed, a long, broken, unwitnessed scream. Then she cried until her body stopped cooperating. Nobody came back that night, or the next night, or the one after. Weeks passed. The silence began to mean something. She knew what it meant because she had been here before. She left me, she thought, like everyone else. But she kept the scarf. She held it at night in the dark. And on her knee, quietly, alone, she played 8 notes with her fingertips. Not on a piano, just on her own leg, in the kitchen, on the mat where she now slept again. Keeping something alive with cupped hands. 2 years passed. Then the phone rang in Ani Ngozi's sitting room. It was Emeka. His voice was broken in the best possible way. She woke up. Adaeze, she woke up. But there's memory loss. The doctors say familiar faces, people from her happiest memories, might help bring things back. We want to bring Dara to America. Ngozi took the call alone. She sat with the phone long after the call ended. And something dark and specific began moving in her mind. She thought about the mansion in Ikoyi where Dara had spent 3 months. She thought about what waited on the other side of that phone call. She thought about Simi. Same age, same build, same complexion. She thought, the woman can't remember faces. The husband barely knows the child. What exactly would stop me? Within days, the plan was operational. She changed the contact number Emeka had stored for Dara. She collected every photograph that could complicate the story and hid them. She spent 3 weeks coaching Simi. The layout of the Ikoyi house, the bedroom colors, the aunt's name, the Saturday morning cooking ritual, Mrs. Adaeze's habits. She drilled her daughter on every detail of those 3 months as though preparing for an examination. But there was one thing she could not teach because she did not know it existed. The song. 8 specific notes in a specific sequence, known only by the woman in America and the girl sleeping on a mat in her kitchen. Dara was told nothing. She woke one morning to find Simi gone and Ngozi wearing a tight, unreadable smile. She assumed Simi had gone to visit a relative. She did not imagine the truth. So she kept waiting, kept holding the scarf, kept playing 8 notes on her knee in the dark, kept believing against everything that they had not forgotten her. When Simi arrived in America, Emeka received her warmly because he was that kind of man, patient, careful, try to honor a promise made in grief. But from the very first evening, something felt wrong to Mrs. Adaeze. Not in any way she could name or argue. Just wrong. The feeling of hearing a song played in the wrong key, of looking at a photograph where one detail is slightly off but you cannot immediately identify it. She studied the girl. She watched her move through the house. And her memory, fractured and fragile as it was, kept reaching for something it could not locate. One afternoon, she sat down at the piano. "Do you remember our song?" she asked quietly, her hands resting on the keys. Simi had been coached. She had been coached specifically for this question. "Of course, Mummy," she said. Mrs. Adaeze played the opening note and waited. Simi hummed something. It was close. It was careful. It was almost exactly right. But it contained one wrong note, precisely in the middle, a single half-step off, invisible to anyone who hadn't built that melody note by note with someone they loved on a piano bench on a Tuesday evening. Mrs. Adeeze's hands went still on the keys. Her face did not move. She said nothing. But that night, she sat alone in the dark room for a long time. The headache started. Every time she looked at Simi, something in her mind pushed back. Not with accusation, but with a confusion so persistent it felt like a locked door being tested again and again. Her therapist said this was part of recovery. Emeka wanted to believe this. But Simi was growing careless. Comfortable. She began requesting things, expensive things, casually, as though entitlement were a language she was reverting to. She stopped being careful about her phone. She stopped watching the doors. One afternoon, she stepped into the garden, believing she was alone, and called her mother. "Mom, listen. They're starting to suspect something. The woman keeps looking at me in this way." She did not hear the door open behind her. She did not see Mrs. Adeeze standing in the doorway. She did not see the exact moment when everything ended. Mrs. Adeeze walked back inside without a word. She sat in the sitting room and waited. When Emeka came home, she looked at him with the specific calm of someone who has moved past confusion into certainty. "That is not our daughter," she said. Emeka went still. "Helen, that is not our daughter." And in her voice, in the absolute, undramatic quiet of it, Emeka heard something that went beyond memory or logic or anything that could be explained by the doctor's language about recovery. He heard a mother who knew, the way mothers know, without evidence and without needing any. He made one call, a private investigator, 72 hours. The full picture, the phone number change, the hidden photographs, the coaching sessions, the real Dara still in Lagos, still sleeping on a mat, still holding a silk scarf, still playing 8 notes on her knee in the dark. Emeka sat down and put his face in his hands. There was one more person who needed to be found, and he was already waiting to be found. Uncle Chidi had lived with the secret for 2 years the way you live with a stone in your chest, aware of it always, never able to put it down. He was Ngozi's husband, a quiet man who had argued with her from the first night she told him the plan, who had begged her to stop, who had threatened to call Emeka himself. She had cried. She had told him he didn't love her. She had told him he was choosing strangers over his own family. And Chidi, who was gentle in the specific way that makes gentle people vulnerable to manipulation, had stayed quiet. But he had not done nothing. In the dark of those 2 years, when Ngozi was not watching, he had slipped food outside the kitchen door at night for Dara to find. He had pressed school money into her hand without a word. He had caught her eyes sometimes across a room in a way that said, "I see you. I know you are here. You are not invisible to everyone." When the investigators arrived at the house, Chidi answered the door. He told them everything, without hesitation, without negotiating, without being asked twice. His testimony was the final confirmation of what they already knew. Emeka and Mrs. Adaeze flew to Lagos. They came to the house unannounced. Ngozi opened the door, and the blood left her face in one clean movement. But Emeka wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her, through the sitting room, toward the back of the house, where a girl was sitting at the back step, doing something quietly, privately, the way children do things they believe nobody is watching. She was pressing her fingertips against her knee. 8 notes. No sound. Just the shape of music on her own skin. Mrs. Adaeze heard it before she could see it. A rhythm she recognized the way she recognized her own heartbeat. And something in her chest broke open, not painfully, but completely, like a door that has been held shut for 2 years, finally releasing. She walked past her husband, past Ngozi, past everything that was in the way. She knelt down on the floor of that house. Dara. The girl looked up. She had heard this voice in the space between waking and sleeping so many times in 2 years that she believed she was imagining it again. She blinked. She blinked again. Dara, Mrs. Adaeze whispered, and her voice was shaking. Play our song. Play it for me. This child, who had carried 2 years of silence and absence, and the specific grief of someone who has been left by everyone they loved, took one breath and played 8 notes. The memories didn't return slowly. They didn't ease back in. They came all at once. The kitchen on Saturday mornings, the jollof rice with too much water, the birthday cake with pink frosting, the piano bench, the pajama dancing in the hallway. The night she carried Dara to bed and the child said goodnight, Mom, without meaning to say it and meaning it completely. She grabbed Dara and held her the way you hold something you thought you had lost permanently. Dara couldn't see anything for a moment. Then she pressed her face in the woman's shoulder and said through tears that soaked through the fabric, I thought you forgot me. I thought you left me like everyone else. Never, Mrs. Adaeze said. She was rocking her back and forth on the floor of that house. Never, never, never. We were always coming back. We never stopped. Emeka stood in the doorway watching his wife hold their daughter for the first time in 2 years, and he had to turn away because some things are too large to look at directly. Ngozi was prosecuted. The details of the case, when they came out in full, were exactly as damning as they deserved to be. Chidi's cooperation with investigators was noted formally and without condition. He lost his marriage. He gained back something more valuable, the knowledge that when the moment came, he had told the truth immediately, without negotiating. Simi faced her own legal consequences. She was returned to Nigeria. 3 weeks later, Dara boarded a plane to America with proper documentation, a new passport, and a teddy bear Emeka had bought her at the airport that she named Scarf immediately and without hesitation. She slept in a real bed that night. She did not have nightmares. She dreamt of kitchen dancing and pink birthday cake and a piano melody that only 2 people in the entire world would ever know. In the morning, she shuffled downstairs in her pajamas and found Mrs. Adaeze in the kitchen, frowning at a pot. Dara looked at the pot. She looked at her mother. She shook her head slowly. You always do this, she said quietly. Mrs. Adaeze looked up. She smiled the way people smile when they have exactly what they wanted and know it. I know. I was waiting for you to fix it. Some people will do anything to take what they never earned. But love, real love, leaves a mark on the soul that no lie can replicate and no time can dissolve. Dara had carried that mark through 2 years of silence, through the mat on the kitchen floor and the worn scarf and the 8 notes tapped on her knee in the dark, and it had led her mother directly back to her. If this story moved you today, you know exactly what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss the next story, and leave a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, because this kind of story needs to find the people who need it most. And they are watching from everywhere.